Picture a single candle flickering in the window of a stately Victorian home, the flame dancing across damask drapes in the hush of a September night. If you stood on the cobbled street below, you might have sensed a presence behind those curtains, someone watching, poised between grandeur and dread. That is how many first glimpsed Madeline Webb, the woman who would come to captivate the public's imagination in a series of events so disturbing that even decades later, the echoes of her name still provoke a shudder. Madeline was born in 1897 in Bath, England, to a family of modest means but grand ambitions. The country was riding a wave of colonial expansion, and the talk in genteel circles often revolved around upholding social graces and moral righteousness. Her parents, both dedicated schoolteachers, instilled discipline and academic rigor in their children. But those who met young Madeline often remarked on a certain single-mindedness. While her siblings were content with backyard games and chores, she appeared to brood on ideas far beyond her years, gazing out windows with a haunted inward look. Hers was a youth touched by the era's oppressive formality, yet it also offered her glimpses of possibility, the notion that a woman of determination could forge her own path if she was willing to pay the price. A pivotal piece of her early upbringing was the family's rigid structure. Meals were to be taken precisely at 6. No one dared speak out of turn or express unhappiness too openly. Conflict was stifled, disagreements concealed behind polite smiles. Some say this environment bred in Madeline an insidious blend of frustration and cunning, a need to hide her true feelings behind a mask of civility. By the time she was 15, she had cultivated that mask to near perfection, responding to adversity with a composed smile that friends found unnerving. But beneath that delicate surface, she was already something of a mystery, even, it's been said, to herself. She first drew attention in local society at 17. With a slender frame and sharp features, Madeline was striking rather than conventionally pretty. She preferred dark dresses that accentuated her pale complexion and lent her an air of quiet severity. People noticed how she seemed to observe them more than speak, as though she were collecting their secrets. At small gatherings, she'd stand near the fringes, absorbing every whispered conversation, her eyes darting with curiosity. One close friend would later recall a party where Madeline, almost unprompted, whispered to her, "You can trap a person by offering them what they want most." The friend laughed it off as a quip, but in hindsight it felt more like a warning. By her early 20s, Madeline found work as a companion to an elderly widow named Harriet Underwood, whose frail health required constant attendance. Harriet, a childless woman of some fortune, seemed smitten by Madeline's gentility. She confided in her, took her on trips to London, even contemplated adjusting her will. In those years, Madeline's own parents had fallen on hard times, and she quietly sent them small sums of money each month. She prided herself on her sense of responsibility, but also seemed drawn to Harriet's affluent world. The crisp linens, the shiny silverware, the upholstered carriages that ferried them to the opera. On one such outing, Harriet turned to Madeline and remarked, "I've never known someone so quietly observant. It's as if you see straight into people's fears." Harriet laughed in her gentle way, but Madeline simply smiled. Everything changed in the spring of 1922. Harriet died suddenly, leaving Madeline a modest sum, enough to provide some independence if managed wisely. While the death was considered natural, a few raised eyebrows at the new beneficiary. But authorities found nothing concrete, no sign of foul play. Madeline moved from Bath to Bristol shortly thereafter, purchasing a small townhouse on the outskirts of the city. She set up a modest living arrangement, with the stated intention of opening a ladies' finishing school, though that particular venture never truly materialized. Instead, she spent her days reading about psychology and the human mind, making quiet visits to wealthy social clubs, and, many suspected, cultivating a network of acquaintances she deemed useful. It was during this period that she met Andrew Webb, a respectable banker in his early 30s. He was taken by her poise, describing her as a woman of uncanny composure, impossible not to admire. They married in 1925, and life seemed full of promise. There are old photographs showing them in front of their townhouse, Andrew's arm wrapped protectively around Madeline's waist, both smiling with an air of careful contentment. But among Andrew's friends, rumors circulated. Someone claimed that Andrew confided in them that Madeline could become icy and withdrawn for days on end, locking herself away in a study, scribbling in a journal, or reading the most peculiar medical tomes, some of which focused on toxicology. He was concerned, but also strangely fascinated by her. "I love her depth," he allegedly told a colleague. "She's like a puzzle I can't resist solving." Tragedy struck soon. In early 1927, Andrew began complaining of severe migraines and bouts of crippling nausea. Doctors assumed it was stress from his demanding job at the bank, prescribing rest and tonics. Madeline, by all accounts, was a devoted caregiver, brewing herbal teas, massaging his temples, ensuring his pillows were fluffed and his meals prepared. Neighbors saw her pacing in the yard at odd hours, her face drawn with worry. Andrew's condition, however, deteriorated rapidly. Within a month, he was bedridden, wasting away from a mysterious ailment. On a stormy night in March, he died, leaving behind a grieving widow who inherited his life insurance policy and the rights to a small estate outside the city. It was only after Andrew's funeral that the first whispers grew louder. A colleague recalled Andrew mentioning the bitter taste in his tea. Another remembered him joking that Madeline's potions could fell a horse. Still, no direct accusations took shape. The medical report suggested a gastric complication, and few dared to challenge a widow's grief. But for some watchers, Harriet Underwood's sudden passing now seemed a darker omen. It was at this point that Madeline quietly moved once more, this time to a more affluent part of Bristol. She redecorated her new home in muted tones, and notably set up a dedicated space that she called her reading room. Those who visited described its strange inventory of books on human anatomy, rare poisons, and the psychology of manipulation. Madeline would smile politely if questioned, explaining she was writing a treatise on the subject. But no such treatise ever appeared. Within a year, Madeline began hosting small gatherings for well-heeled acquaintances. Some were wealthier widowers, men of status who found her reserved charm alluring. One of them, Sir Roger Ashworth, became a frequent visitor. He was nearly 30 years her senior and deeply entrenched in local politics. Over tea, they would discuss current affairs, and she'd play the attentive listener, letting him hold court. "You're the only soul who understands me," he was rumored to have said. Their arrangement, part friendship, part courtship, carried on for months. The scandal began when Sir Roger fell ill under nearly identical circumstances to Andrew Webb's final days. The migraines, the unrelenting nausea, the unstoppable spiral toward collapse. This time, however, suspicion was immediate. Sir Roger's valet privately approached the local constabulary, insisting that something was amiss. He was in perfect health mere weeks ago, the man insisted. Now, he can barely lift his head. Madeline's involvement was not proven, but the local authorities had reason to keep a discreet watch on her. One policeman, after meeting her, noted in his journal that she has a most unnerving composure. Her eyes, though soft, carry an impenetrable emptiness. Indeed, Madeline continued tending to Sir Roger with the same unwavering dedication she had shown Andrew. she insisted on preparing his meals herself, often refusing the help of nurses. By the end of autumn 1929, Sir Roger succumbed to his ailment. Weeks later, Madeline came forward with a letter, allegedly signed by him, bestowing upon her a sizable sum of money and a minor property in southern Wales. The authenticity of that letter would later be hotly contested. Now, scandal erupted. The newspapers pounced on the story of this Black Widow of Bristol, though they were careful not to name her outright for fear of libel. Rumors connected the sudden deaths of Harriet Underwood, Andrew Webb, and Sir Roger. Were these tragic coincidences, or was a more sinister pattern emerging? The local coroner's office, pressured by whispers from the public and private demands from Sir Roger's extended family, exhumed his body for examination. Traces of arsenic were found in alarmingly high quantities. Investigators went further, re-examining Andrew's remains. Although the evidence was less conclusive, there were enough lingering signs to suggest poisoning. Suddenly, Madeline's once impeccable reputation was in tatters. In late 1930, authorities quietly arranged for Madeline's arrest. She was taken into custody at her Bristol home, reportedly displaying that same eerie calm. One constable present later claimed she merely offered a thin smile and said, "I assume you'll handle my books with care," gesturing toward her reading room. The press descended on the story, though printing restrictions of the time meant that only the more fearless outlets published salacious details. Still, word of mouth spread like wildfire. Everyone in the region seemed to have a theory about Madeline's guilt or innocence. Some neighbors spoke of her kindness, recounting how she'd offered to look after their children. Others insisted she had an unnatural fascination with power and control. One neighbor recalled a conversation in which Madeline allegedly said, "The mind is a fortress, and those who hold the key can reshape lives at will." During the first hearings, Madeline's defense portrayed her as a misunderstood intellectual whose knowledge of toxicology was purely academic. They cast doubt on the chain of evidence, pointing out that arsenic was historically common in household items, even used in certain medical treatments. Could the poison have come from a contaminated well or some unsuspected source? Madeline herself rarely spoke, conferring with her attorneys in whispers and occasionally casting a cool glance across the courtroom. Observers noted that despite the gravity of the charges, her composure never cracked, save for one fleeting moment when a former servant testified about seeing her add a strange powder to Andrew's evening tea. Then, for a split second, Madeline's face seemed to tense, the muscles around her eyes flickering with something akin to fury. The turning point came when a longtime acquaintance of Harriet Underwood stepped forward, claiming Harriet once voiced deep unease about her companion. "I woke to find her standing by my bed in the middle of the night," Harriet supposedly told this acquaintance. "She claimed she heard me cry out, but I had been fast asleep. Her gaze, I shall never forget it." This testimony, while not direct proof, painted Madeline in a chilling light. Paired with the scientific findings of arsenic in Sir Roger's remains, it fueled the prosecution's narrative of a calculating poisoner who methodically targeted wealthy benefactors and lovers for personal gain. The trial was a media sensation. Afternoon tabloids featured lurid front-page illustrations of Madeline with the caption, "Dark Angel of Bristol." Editorials debated the role of women in society and the seductive allure of a seemingly gentle killer. Families followed each day's proceedings with a mix of shock and fascination. Yet Madeline's lawyers continued to stress the circumstantial nature of the evidence. Yes, arsenic was found, but who could prove that she administered it? The alleged deathbed letters could have been typed by anyone, and Harriet Underwood's testamentary decisions were all perfectly legal. Nonetheless, the public, and seemingly the court, was leaning firmly toward guilt. After weeks of testimony, the jury returned a guilty verdict for the murder of Sir Roger Ashworth, with recommended further inquiries into Andrew Webb's and Harriet Underwood's deaths. Madeline's expression remained stony as the verdict was read. She was sentenced to death by hanging, a penalty that for many was as shocking as the crimes themselves. But according to prison officials, behind bars, she neither confessed nor displayed remorse. Instead, she spent her final days reading from a worn volume on botanical poisons, writing in a journal that was never made public, and keeping largely to herself. On the morning of her execution, the only words she was heard to speak were, "Make it quick," as she walked with measured steps to the gallows. In the immediate aftermath, relatives of the deceased found themselves wrestling with more than just the grief of loss. Sir Roger's family name, once prestigious, was now linked to a scandal that overshadowed their philanthropic works. Andrew's closest friends mourned not only the man but their own failure to recognize the danger he was in. Some fell into guilt-ridden spirals, haunted by the thought that they might have saved him had they spoken sooner about his suspicions. Even Madeline's family was torn apart by shame. Her parents, lifelong educators, abandoned their positions and left Bath entirely, unable to bear the weight of the scandal. Quiet heartbreak permeated every corner of their former community. The public's reaction was a frenzy of both condemnation and lurid fascination. Many clamored for details. What was Madeline's precise method? Did she plan every step or improvise out of desperation? Newspapers sold sensational stories by the thousands, painting her as a master manipulator. Others criticized the trial as an example of societal hypocrisy. Would the public have been so transfixed had Madeline been a man of similar means? Political debates on capital punishment flared up, with some calling for the abolition of a sentence so final and irreversible. Others demanded an even stricter crackdown on crimes they saw as emblematic of moral decay among the upper classes. The case became a flashpoint, fueling discussions about the legal standards for conviction in poisoning cases, especially those involving strong but circumstantial evidence. In the years that followed, Madeline's name lingered in the collective consciousness. Novelists used her story as fodder for Gothic thrillers. Poets penned verses about a woman's hidden darkness beneath society's veneer. The controversy also had a tangible impact on forensic methods. A push for more rigorous toxicology protocols emerged, leading to improvements in how suspicious deaths were investigated. Britain's legal community cited the Webb trial when calling for clearer guidelines on presenting forensic evidence in court. Scholars wrote monographs dissecting Madeline's psychological makeup, exploring the possibility of unresolved trauma or a personality bent on exerting control through any means necessary. The popular imagination grappled with how someone so seemingly refined could commit such monstrous acts. Was she born a predator, or did circumstance make her one? And so, we come to the end of this unsettling chronicle, left with questions that can never be fully resolved. Can any of us claim to truly understand the heart of another person? Madeline Webb's story endures as a cautionary tale about the masks people wear and the horrors that can lurk beneath polished manners. The darkest truths, it seems, can hide in the most genteel settings, and the illusions we accept in polite society can be the very forces that enable catastrophe. Perhaps the final tragedy is how easily those illusions beguile us until it's too late to turn back.